This is the Voice of Early Childhood podcast. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Voice of Early Childhood. My name is Angelica. I'm the founder of the Voice of Early Childhood. And today I have with me Dr. Jacqueline Harding. Thank you, Jacqueline, for joining me today.
You're so welcome.
So today we're going to discuss The Brain That Loves to Play, which is a book that Jacqueline wrote, and she'll tell you a lot more about that. And basically we'll be discussing all of what the book contains, and more widely things around early years, particularly play. So I'll just quickly say what Jacqueline does. Lots of things, but primarily she's an international child development specialist, a research fellow at Middlesex University, and also chair of Bright Start Foundation. And like I said, many, many other things. So we'll kickstart by talking a little bit about play to begin with, and then weaving in throughout into other areas. So play is a term that's widely used in early years and in society, but has very different perceptions of what that term actually means and what play involves, and then also the value that it brings. So I guess, Jacqueline, what do you mean by play when you discuss it in your book? And I guess, how do we see play generally in early years, and what's your kind of perception of the early years sector?
Well, it's such a good question to start off with, because, we may all be forgiven for thinking that formal learning is the main driver in education and what really counts for life. But after decades of research in play, whatever you're going to call it, and whatever definition we give it, coupled with robust brain research due to fMRI scans, we really need to have a good rethink what we mean by play and its value. And so I'm believing that with play, we need a very ambitious and transformational understanding of the value of play due to the brain that loves to play.
Mm-hmm. So it's all intertwined in child development. It's, a lot of the time when we think about play, particularly if we don't really know early years development very well. So perhaps, families and practitioners that are not qualified yet or are still studying, maybe they see play as just what children love to do and they enjoy it and it's part of children's interests. But actually, it's so intertwined in the way that the brain develops.
Yes, absolutely. It's as though it's a masterful plan. And to be honest, any serious deviation from play comes at a cost for all of us and for society. So its importance cannot be underestimated. And when you think of just how influential the brain is, because it's like the command center of the whole body, and uses 20% oxygen and our resources, something is going on that maybe we just need to delve a little bit deeper and find out what actually gives the brain the incentive to learn through play.
Mm-hmm. So I guess when you talk about the incentive to learn and to learn through play specifically, it's all about lifelong learning and the attitudes to learning and dispositions. So it's far beyond just finding something out or just kind of having a fun time, I guess, which is mainly what either learning and or play is kind of narrowed down to. It's a lot more deeper than that, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of stress and a buffer against stress, it offers something that's quite unique. And we know now through neuroscience that we need a buffer against some of these really difficult things that are happening in life. And I give the analogy of going running, which I don't do very often, and wearing trainers, because it gives you that little bit of a buffer, and play provides children with that buffer against the kinds of stresses that no one wants for children.
And that kind of reminds me, so in your book, so this is, I'll just make sure that everyone can see if they're watching on YouTube. So in your book, you mention the importance of play from birth. And what I think is particularly interesting is the power of the smile. So that kind of, when you said play as a buffer, it kind of makes me think, so when we have these adult-child interactions, we're building that foundation, we're building those attachments, aren't we? So it's kind of like that foundation from where children can begin to feel safe and then learn and explore from.
Yeah, Angelica, you're so right, because humans are open systems. We're a bit like a sponge, and we take in information. So we become wired to the environment and to people around us. And when you look at the brain, and I've got my brain here, and we often use analogies or whatever, but our brain network is not an analogy, it's a reality. So we see the neurons that are all bustling to join up, and we have 128 billion that we're born with. And so it's all about connection. And one of the very first things that we do with connection is we connect to people. We're highly dependent on others, not only for our survival, but for our brain development, our body development. And so that social smile and eyeballing children, that eye-to-eye contact, could never be underestimated. And I've conducted some research for Fisher-Price, and in the end I called it playful triangulation. I pulled out some of those magical moments that really do something for the children that nothing else can. And in terms of human interaction, that eye-to-eye contact, that shared attention, spontaneous play, sensory play does something as magical in the brain. And it's time that we got on board with that. It's time that we got on board with what science is really telling us. And what's happened over the last 5 years has been revolutionary. And we're beginning to understand that sometimes unpick stuff as well, because sometimes we use analogies and sometimes we're using reality, like there is a brain network. And in my book, guess what? I use an analogy as too. So I'm guilty as well. But you kind of need to do that, because how on earth are you going to explain it? So I talk about an orchestra and how the parts of the brain are all interconnected. So we're now challenging things around the triune brain, because we have 4 parts that are desperate to connect. And of course, the conductor, who is that? That's us as parents, as practitioners, as grandparents. We can really provide the environment, the space, the right for children to play, so that that brain network can really do its finest work.
So I'm also looking at your book and thinking you mentioned that babies are primed to play through interaction. So like you just mentioned, for all of the kind of family interactions, through interactions with practitioners and anyone else around the child. So it's really important to really tune in to the child, isn't it? And like I said, especially from birth, to really get, like you say, all of that kind of orchestra going and ready and playing, and literally playing. So it makes me think of sustained shared thinking and mirroring as well. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that, and how, I guess, bring in the neuroscience into that, because a lot of the time we hear sustained shared thinking and we hear mirroring, and we do it in practice, and parents do it, and carers do it. But actually, what is happening in the brain at those points?
Okay. Right. Well, we have something called mirror neurons. Mirror neurons are like little detectors to feel and beginning to feel what it's like for someone else. So you begin to, the young developing brain delights to connect. And so their vulnerability must be safeguarded, because the way that we respond to them through shared thinking or through mirroring behaviors, we need to be very alert, I think, and respectful of what's going on inside the brain, because neurons that fire together wire together, which is quite a popular phrase. Something called tuning and pruning. And the tuning, which is, and I mean, you're nodding at me right now, so we are beginning to connect in a way that you would really want young children to connect. So it's a lot about micro and macro expressions, which is something I've been studying for years. And it's exciting because we can't ask children what's going on in their heads. When they're little, they can only show us, but they can begin to give us a little bit of a clue as to what's going on. So mirrored and matched with what we're understanding in neuroscience, plus good practice and relaxing and really enjoying that play. And as I say, the research that I've conducted has shown really we need to laugh a little bit more. We need to be less serious. We need to be much more engaged and in the moment. Because if we're not really celebrating our lives and challenging ourselves and bright and alert, then what have we to offer children? So the brain that loves to play is all about neuroplasticity, which means we used to think fixed from birth, nothing to do, or maybe fixed from 7 years. And then we thought, oh, hang on a moment, it's longer than that. And I've been following the work of Norman Deutsch and his work. Oh my gosh, it was a eureka moment for me and dovetailed with some of my own research in creativity and imagination, which remind me to tell you about that in a moment. But let's go with the big moment. Forgive me, I have my Christmas decorations with me. It's just like shades. I think I'm a very simple person. So this is imagination and creativity turns genes on or off at a cellular level, which then create proteins, which then change the actual architecture of the brain. So when we know that responsibility and we know that it is play that is the main driver, it is not rote learning, it is not the sort of stuff over the years that we valued. And we begin to really sort of throw it up in the air and say, okay, well, if we know this about child development, and if we know this about brain science, what sort of children might we be encouraging for the future? And I suggest the type of thinking that we need are children who are creative and imaginative to solve some of the problems that we've created and generations before us have created. So imagination and creativity makes the brain work very, very hard. You think, well, okay, well, isn't that daydream? I was a daydreamer back in school. You should have seen me most of the time. And apparently I was doing some good work in my brain. I never knew that. So Jacqueline, for goodness sake, focus. But that part of imagination and creativity is something that we're beginning to give a little poke and say, oh, so this could be something that we need for now, in the moment, because childhood and play is certainly not just for this moment or just as a preparation for adulthood. It must be valued for what it is.
So I guess creativity is very much like you coming up with your own understandings of things. And it is quite maybe similar to critical thinking, rather than just taking in facts, just taking in knowledge. Actually, when you're thinking critically and you're being creative and perhaps imaginative, then what you're really doing is putting information together. So I guess it's kind of social cultural kind of learning, social learning. And you're putting the things that you've experienced, the things that you've heard and learned, putting them together, processing them, and then coming out with something new.
Yeah, absolutely. And I said that I'd conducted some research with a medical doctor. And this is a fair few years ago. And we were commissioned to research the impact. I still get excited talking about it now. It was years ago. Imagination and creativity on the young developing child. So off we went to a very deprived area, 2 schools, this poor medical doctor and scientist who looked scared out of his wits. And in we went with a school that was actually failing at the time, and a head teacher who was willing to change the whole curriculum for 6-year-olds into a creative and imaginative process. Oh my God, how exciting is that? And we filmed it and recorded it for 18 months.
Oh, wow.
What happened? What happened is I began to completely be bowled over by everything I knew about creativity and imagination and formal learning, and started to question what is really going on. And it turns out that absenteeism was reduced, not only for children, but also for the adults and the teachers and the practitioners within the school.
Oh, okay.
And that was acknowledged. And at that time, I mean, there were SATs and it was all very formal at 7 years of age. Guess what? Everything soared. Not that, I mean, that's a completely different debate about whether we should have them or not. But that was the case. So it begins to raise a very ambitious and transformative question to ourselves around the kinds of activities that we should value in early years. And what we saw was the whole of biology on bended knee, ready to make those aha moments because they were in a creative, imaginative space. And another fascinating thing that we found was that after children had been in the zone and had been in a timeless bubble, when you're so engrossed in something, that then they felt compelled. So there was this rise in biology, if you like, and the high stakes that are happening within the developing brain. They then rushed off to tell somebody about it. I began to think, why is that? It's because they felt the joy and the laughter and the freedom to play in a way that was autonomous, self-driven, spontaneous, and it does something within the prefrontal cortex that nothing else can do. And we need that with role play, we need it with imagination, we need it. We need to have a much more creative approach.
I guess when we think about adults in the workplace and or doing any kind of activities or hobbies that they enjoy, we can really be able to understand what we're talking about in terms of children a lot easier, because actually there's so much research and we always see and read things around kind of improved productivity at work, I guess, when employees are allowed to make their own decisions, have their own agency, and maybe even have more of a work-life balance and decide that the hours they work, etc. And it's, of course, it makes sense if it's the same with children, in terms of being allowed to learn in the way that they want to learn, in a joyous and exciting way, in a creative way. It's the same kind of thing, isn't it? But we may not necessarily see it when we look at children, but actually when we relate it to adults, it seems a lot more obvious.
Yeah, it does. And I've got lots of examples of adults that I know who experience play poverty. And you might think, okay, well, play poverty, I mean, is that important? Is it that you can kind of make up for it? Well, let me tell you about somebody that I know who is a scientist, a renowned scientist. She probably wouldn't mind me saying her name, but I won't. And she was made to study after school and during kindergarten, made to learn, to have a very structured experience. Yes, became a very famous scientist, but when we meet, and when she kind of talks to me about her heart, she wants to play. She wants that joyfulness. She feels she missed out. And that begins to say something about the long-term effects of play poverty. Let me tell you about another little girl I had in my school when I was a head teacher. I had a young carer. She was 5 years of age, dressed inappropriately for winter, came in quite cold, very quiet. Certainly, this whole regime of let's sit in front of tables was kind of alien to her. And so we abandoned any kind of formality, and we set her the ability to engage in imaginative play. And you think, okay, well, didn't the other children go like, well, that's not fair? No, children will often accept the needs of others. And it was 6 months, it was 6 months investment in that child with play, that then things began to turn around, and she would show interest in phonics. Otherwise, I mean, how on earth have you got any kind of emotional space when you are troubled by other things? So that was another example of how I've actually seen what play poverty can do.
And it goes back to that feeling of safety and security and comfort. And when you were talking about children's interest in play and that excitement and joy, it really reminded me of flow, because you talked about, being really engrossed in something. And that's when I thought, well, with adults, it's the same thing. So it makes complete sense that children would even more so engross themselves in something exciting and something that they're really interested in and something that they're passionate about. And that state of flow, I guess, I have no idea what happens in the brain during that state, but I guess there's a lot of exciting things happening in the brain.
Yes. Now, there's something called the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. And what we need for children is to have everything calm down. And when you feel calm, and when the whole system, your biology and your brain, because the brain and body are porous, they connect much more than we ever used to think. We used to think they're all separate, but it's not like that. Then you become able to join the dots. And that's what creative problem solving, critical thinking does. It joins the dots. And there was a really amazing experiment by NASA back in the 1950s or 60s, it was, where they thought, you know what we need? We need real problem solvers. We need creative thinkers. Let's find out what is really going on. So they got a whole bunch of 5-year-olds. I think there were about 1,500 of them, or 4 or 5. And it turns out that immediately, his name was George Land, he found that 98% of these children were geniuses. And you think, oh, this is amazing. We're on a roll. NASA's thinking, great, we're going to have scientists of the future. And then a very different experience entered their lives. And by now, you and all people watching this or listen to it are going to guess what happens. So as over time, their genius eroded bit by bit by bit by bit. by which time NASA said, well, this is embarrassing. Let's ditch the whole thing. But what shows is actually we can damage children's creative and imaginative and problem-solving ability by not respecting what goes on in the brain. So I'm definitely, as you say in this book, making a call for a real rethink about what we mean by play, what we mean by education, what we mean by lifelong learning, and how we set those foundations from a brain and body friendly kind of way.
Hiya, just a very quick and a very exciting announcement. The Voice of Early Childhood Conference is back. After the success of our first one, we have organised another one on the 16th of March 2024. This will be a day full of learning, sparking reflections, sharing and networking. And I can already share with you the speakers we have announced so far. They are Dr. Nathan Archer, Dr. Stella Louis, Adam Marrich and Ben Kingston Hughes. You can find out all about the presentations on the Voice of Early Childhood website. So our venue is once again at the fantastic Nottingham University Clifton campus, which boasts modern conference facilities as well as some beautiful green surroundings. And of course, really good accessibility from around the UK, being in the Midlands. And the venue is also close to the M1, close to a park and ride, a bus service right at the university campus. So really great accessibility. As always, you can expect on our conference day opportunities for shared reflection, discussion, and healthy debate, valuable CPD, a diverse range of speakers, a safe space to share your practice and your own thoughts, a relaxed atmosphere, plenty of opportunities for networking, and also a selection of exhibitor stands to explore and ask questions, and of course, fantastic food and refreshments. And for 2024, we of course had to step it up a notch. We also have for you a choice of workshops with a leadership and a practice strand to choose from, a start of the day and an end of the day keynote, interactive sessions, and even a one-to-one Q&A surgery with the brilliant Dr. Sue Allingham. So make the most of Dr. Sue's surgery by coming prepared with your burning questions for practice, leadership, Ofsted, or anything else you can think of. I'm sure she would be happy to answer away. So if this sounds like the kind of conference and early childhood community that you would like to be part of, then grab your tickets before they sell out. We have limited capacity. And if you haven't already heard, you can get a 10% off code to use at checkout by signing up to our newsletter. I've added the link in this episode description where you can sign up for your code, find out more about the conference and more about the speakers, and also access our Eventbrite page to secure your ticket. So I will see you in March. And when you say brain and body friendly way, is that linked to children really playing actively? You know, like we see, for instance, in the English EYFS, you know, active learning and active play is so important. And that really does allow children to play in a way that is developmentally appropriate. You know, they're not ready to be sitting still on the carpet or at tables. So really making sure that the brain works, I guess, in collaboration with the body.
You're so right. And the posh name for it is allostasis. So the brain, the command center, has to all the time work out what the body needs. And it kind of thinks, oh, I need to allocate some resources to this and resources to that. So all the time it's about this balance and working very hard to do that. And the somatosensory area in the brain, which is what it says is about the senses and the four regions coming together, loves sensory movement and hearing and seeing. It needs to be active. And if we rob children of the ability to be active in an autonomous, self-driven, self-chosen way, we've got some kind of rethinking to do.
Mm-hmm.
And responsibility, if you like, to these little developing brains and the way that they're actually allocating the resources to the body. And young children need to move. And it's the way that the body and the brain work together. And I've done some research, loads of research around movement and how that impacts our brains and how we need to get up and how we need and we need to walk backwards and do things and challenge ourselves in ways we've never done before, because neurogenesis is where we're forever generating new neurons. And if we want to be alert, if we want to be the sort of people that are curious, and if we want to pass on that curiosity to children, it's almost like what we're learning about children, whoa, it better come back on us. It kind of boom back on us. So yes, I finished the book by talking about us and about what we need from a neurobiological kind of fashion, so that we're in a good place, so that we're healthy, so that we're able to have healthy interactions with children.
That reminds me of that whole phrase of you need to take care of yourself or love yourself before you can love others. And I guess it's the same thing in terms of thinking about the adult and the child. And if anything, the adult is modeling to the child, how they learn, how they play, how they take in information, how active they are, how they interact with others, and then brings all of that to the child who's constantly watching.
Yeah, you're so right. And sometimes we think, well, okay, well, it's a bit indulgent, isn't it? Caring for ourselves.
To just think about yourself. Yeah, or put yourself first.
First. But if we're able to ourselves enter imaginative and creative spaces, I mean, that might be reading a book, it might be dancing, I don't know, whatever your thing is, or making play. And I have a friend across the road who is quite a prestigious, has a prestigious position in her work, and yet she derives the pleasure and the incentive for her work from working with clay, and it inspires her. And again, for us, that what we know about the developing brain is now we know that it isn't all finished, and we can still learn and we can still change, and that's exciting for us as practitioners, as parents, as grandparents. And I'm passionate that people should know about these things. So, and of course, I mean, people say, well, there are so many neuromyths around. Well, yes, there are, but we need to stick to robust evidence. And if we do that, then we should be sharing that information, because it's so inspiring that we can't really keep it to ourselves, and it just helps us feel better. And we know the impact of stress on the body and the brain, and we really need to protect ourselves too.
And really, when you talk about being, I guess, research informed, it's really vital for educators to consider that and think, why am I doing what I'm doing? Why have I set an environment up like this? Why are children playing for X amount of time and then I'm taking them elsewhere? So really thinking about, is there evidence, is there research that supports this practice, or what is the best ways for children to develop and learn, and what research exists out there, rather than, this is what we've always done, or this is what another setting down the road does, or someone online has, put a picture on social media and I'm going to copy it. It's constantly thinking, is there research to back this up? I guess it's then engaging that critical and creative brain of yours as a practitioner, constantly thinking critically, why am I doing this?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's almost like, I don't know, in society often we're not supposed to question, we're supposed to form. And I'm not encouraging everyone to be, rebellious, but I'm thinking, okay, well, do question things, read the research. And I believe that we should not be making research, particularly around brain science, so mystical that nobody understands it. And it then becomes the domain of the experts. Well, who are the experts? The parents, the grandparents, the practitioners. And they become experts via observation and via knowing the child. And so in the book, I've got lots of fly on the wall films where you can actually see children engaging in play. And I still find it so thrilling when I see it, where the learning is evident. And we don't have this over sort of teacherly effect. Now, I'm not saying there are times when we should step in or step out of play, and all of those kind of debates. We need to continue to have those. And it's not about abandoning children and going off and have a cup of tea, but really the observation of their micro and macro expressions can tell us so much about the schemas they may be interested in. What is it that they need in that moment? And that can change. And we can then it's like provocations, we can just pop in something that takes it to another level. Vygotsky's stuff, still relevant today. That's on the proximal development, just offering that something, but not interfering. It's a balance. It's an art. It's expertise. It's what practitioners are trained and continue to do that is so precious and needs to be respected.
I think when you talk about that expertise that practitioners have, it's very nuanced, isn't it? Like you discussed, it's noticing those little things that you can support the child with through observations. It's adding that little bit of difference through a resource or through an interaction, which can often not be seen as, you're not doing enough, for instance, if you're just kind of stepping back and observing, or you're just talking to the child and actually, well, you may not be seen as teaching, but that is teaching in early years. That is, pedagogy. That is that teaching and learning. It's all intertwined and reciprocal, isn't it? It's not just standing up at the front and teaching them something or giving them something new in terms of facts.
Yeah, you're so right. And play is the most efficient way of helping the brain develop the foundations that it needs. And sadly, the other day I heard of a 4-year-old who was just off to preschool. A mum comes up behind and said, "Oh, never mind," and I won't say the name. You'll soon be in big school where you'll be able to learn. You won't just have to play." And when you realise that kind of misconception, we do need to shout just a little bit louder about how the brain develops so that we don't have these misconceptions. I know parents sets out to really make life difficult for children. No practitioner sets out to make it as difficult as possible. But this kind of joining of the knowledge of child development, the fusion, can make all the difference in the way that we think about ourselves and the way that we interact with other humans, because we are responsible for how we impact other people's brains. Now, I won't go into that at the moment, but we really have some exciting research at the moment about how we're all really impacting each other. And it begins to raise the question, okay, what's the most efficient way to help build brains and resilience? Because without resilience and without that, I'm going to be okay. I mean, how many times every week do you feel that you've failed on something? I mean, about 3 times a week I think, oh, blast, I should have done something in a different way. And I have to pick myself up. And that picking yourself up that ability can't just be transmitted. It has to be modeled, as you're saying. And also through play, children begin to build that kind of resilience, the ability to get things wrong. We need to get things wrong, and we need to then understand why we got things wrong. And children do that when you watch them playing with mud, when you watch them making dens. And I've spent thousands of hours observing children, and I am deeply impressed, as NASA was, and their ingenuity. Let's not erode that. Let's kind of tap into what we really know about the young developing brain.
And that really reminds me of advocacy in early years, where we're talking about play and teaching and ensuring that play is understood. I guess protecting play in a way, because unfortunately we have to do that. But really making sure, like I said earlier, and like you mentioned, ensuring that everything is research informed. The things that we say about play, it is research informed from the child development stance, because a lot of the time I think we may advocate for play and talk about all the various skills that children can learn through play, but actually we need more to back it all up for those people that are not in early years, and for people that do want to hear the evidence. It is important to be able to reference and evidence, what you're talking about. Everybody wants to kind of hear, well, where did you get that information from? So it's just about having more of that knowledge and being more informed by neuroscience, by child development, isn't it? And not just, this is what I've seen a child do, and it's almost case by case based, case study based.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And that fusion of what we see and what we know, which is evidence-based and safe for us to embrace, is the way forward. It sounds so simple, doesn't it? And yet maybe we need to invest a little bit of time into trying to grapple with. It's because some of the words to do with the brain do sound a little bit complex.
Like you said earlier, they're not very accessible. Sometimes the research is not very accessible, is it? Because of all the jargon and, like you say, it is very complicated, isn't it? It's scientific language.
Yeah, it is. And so in this book, I try and break it down, and I try to sort of give examples and little films that exemplify that. Because why should anyone be ignorant today? Why? Why should anyone really not have access to high quality information as a parent? And I'm often, as soon as I say the sort of thing that I do, I get pinned up against the wall by parents. Okay, so what kinds of activities might help brain growth? And and it's amazing when I say things like having a good laugh together is great. And they're like, really? Well, yes.
Kind of like, is that it? Is that how simple it is?
Well, sometimes absolutely, it really is. Laughter is an under-researched area, but I'm beginning to see that it's a lot to do with creativity, it's a lot to do with imagination, it's a lot to do with connecting the dots. And don't forget, I was talking about this brain network that needs to do the job of joining the dots, joining one part to another. We don't talk about the right side of the brain or left side of the brain. I mean, that's all it just isn't kind of the way that we talk about it anymore. And that makes us sit up and think, okay, so having a laugh is about absurdities. And that means the brain has to work quite hard to think, okay, so that bit's real, that's probably not. So when you say a cow goes meow, I mean, it brings the house down for under threes. And in that, you see how their whole physiology lights up, because they're like, yes, I know that's not true. And in the brain is working terribly hard. At 2 years of age, when children play, that mental activity is just as hard work as you and I when we're studying. Amazing. So we're actually making them work quite hard when we present these absurdities and nursery rhymes that make them think. Another really good one that I talk to parents about is peekaboo. How simple is that? I'm here, I'm not here. And in the book, you'll see some hilarious moments. And you can't help but laugh because of the mirror neurons stuff that's going on and how we're empathetic. And you feel kind of like inspired by these simple activities that are joyful and that make us all relax and have a laugh. And you may remember times when, well, I certainly do. I had a really complex, challenging situation last week. I thought, you know what, I'm just going to put it on the shelf. I'm going to go and watch my favorite comedian. I had a huge laugh because he really does make me laugh. And then I went back to the challenge that I had, took it off the shelf, have a good look at it, and I found the solution. So there's something around a very light-hearted, joyful approach that can make such a huge difference to us as adults and for children as well.
So really, I guess that kind of goes back to what I said at the beginning, the power of a smile, which is what really jumped out at me when I was looking at your book. So yeah, it all goes back to that positivity and those positive social interactions and mirroring, like you talked about. And so you mentioned that there's videos in the book. So is it these QR codes that then take you to, the different videos? So that's fantastic because that really makes it a lot more accessible, doesn't it, in terms of, visually, and it's not just all here in the book. You can find out so much more. I think that's great for readers. And another thing that I wanted to mention, so in your book, you lay it out in a way where you discuss play from birth to around 1 month, play from around 1 month to 4 months, and then it goes on. So play from around 18 months to 2 years. So it really goes on up to around 4 years to 5 years plus.
Yeah, 5 years plus. Absolutely. I couldn't resist it. I had to stop somewhere.
Yeah. You could keep going into adulthood, couldn't you? Like we were saying, we all play as adults.
Yeah, absolutely. And I decided not to take professional films. I mean, I work on children's TV shows as well, and I'm desperately hard to make sure that they're developmentally correct, because the internet TV shows and whatever are never going to go away, and we need to make them the very best that they can
that's
be.
True.
And we're not saying that children should be watching television, for 4 hours a day. I'm not saying stuff like that, but I'm saying that it should be developmentally appropriate. So I decided not to go for the professional, just fly on the wall. Yeah, it's a bit, it's a bit wobbly, but it's real.
It's authentic, isn't it? It's genuine.
And they're not like performing. And I also have a whole pile of colleagues of mine, Professor Pat Preedy, who talks about movement, Professor Victoria, she from Middlesex University. I mean, she is just a genius. So I'm drawing on all of these people, and I've stuffed it all in one book. So I thought, here we go, let's put in everything that could be relevant for parents and practitioners and grandparents. And you can kind of navigate your way around it that gives you joy and that gives you inspiration, so that when you march into the nursery the next day, your eyes light up when you see a child, because as soon as a child sees that you're like, oh, wow, you're here, it does something to the brain and the body that goes, I'm valued. Okay, so I'm valued. Therefore, I'm free. I'm safe. I can learn in the way that I need to learn. Powerful. Yes, you're so right. Beginning this conversation with the social smile. Biology, our own biology, has certainly made it so that we've started off with that social smile, because we are connected. We cannot survive without that kind of human, sensitive human interaction. Because as I said, the brain is wired. I mean, genetically, stuff is happening pre-birth, but after birth, it's all about the environment. It's all about the social interaction. And we have a responsibility to not, and here we go, this is a bit revolutionary, not to bore out of children and bore the life out of ourselves at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point. And maybe another kind of podcast episode in itself around boredom and children, and, you know, all of the learning and critical thinking that brings in itself, you know, when children are left in a room full of, I guess, loose parts, open-ended resources, or nothing perhaps, rather than toys that entertain them. And that's, I think, quite interesting, actually, because then you tap into that joy, you know, in your brain and through social interactions, rather than something else that brings you kind of joy for a snippet of time, and it's not that deep.
That's right. So when I say about boring children, I mean giving them that kind of rote learning or all the rest of it. Boredom is underestimated, because when we're not ramming children with stuff to do and taking them from one thing to another, children don't have the space to be bored. I was bored as a child. I remember saying to my mum, I'm bored, but very quickly I would find something to do. And it isn't about ramming, as you say, giving them lots of stuff all the time, but just observing, noticing what can do its best, very, very best, for the developing brain and for the developing body.
Well, I think that's probably a good place to finish our podcast episode on, as we could go on and on forever. I think it's such an interesting topic. So, so this is, I'll just show the viewers again. This is Jacqueline's book that we were talking about. And it is, it's a brilliant book. And I just want to mention that it says it's a visual guide to child development, play and brain growth, because, you know, that's what you talk about in terms of the videos. And there's plenty of images here of children and diagrams and things like that. So it'll be a very valuable resource to practitioners. And I think parents also, like you mentioned, didn't you?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So our listeners can find out more on the Voice of Early Childhood. And also, if you're interested in this episode, then we also have episodes from Matt Baller, who talks about growth mindset in early childhood, which kind of relates a little bit to what Jacqueline was talking about, and Maureen Hunt, who talks about self-efficacy in young children. And they both also mention resilience. So that's quite linked in as well. So yeah, thank you very much, Jacqueline. And I'm sure we'll discuss lots of other things to do with the brain and play again. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.